All right, folks, we wanted to do, it's a low wind day, it's early in the morning here, so we wanted to do a quick segment, a very quick segment on marine hardware tips, because we see a lot of stuff done wrong pretty much everywhere we look, and a lot of it just knowledge, people just don't know. So I wanted to talk first about fasteners. Fasteners, everybody should create a box like this if they've got a boat. Every time I go to the hardware store, I just buy 2 or 3 more of whatever I'm buying, and this is what I've ended up with eventually. Everything in here is stainless steel. You should never be using anything other than stainless steel on a boat in a marine environment. And the most common type of fasteners you find are going to be 18/8 fasteners, stainless. They also make a 3/16 stainless, which is a little bit more, has a little bit more chrome in the metal. It's a little bit more resistant to rusting if you're in a salt environment. You can, if you get a choice between the two, you certainly want to go with a 3/16. But most of the hardware stores and marine outfitters, West Marine, places like that, the average fastener is going to be 18/8. And then these are nylock nuts. They've got a nylon washer in there that makes it so that when you tighten it down, it won't back off. There's really almost no fastener on your boat that you want to have, work loose. And just like knots, a big part of fastener choices and whether you use these types of nuts or if you use a thread locking compound, it's also about getting it off. If you use regular, nickel plated screws from the hardware store, they're going to rust, and they're going to rust pretty aggressively to the point that you won't be able to get it apart. The previous owner of this boat had used, you can kind of see it perhaps up underneath there, the discoloration in the fiberglass. All of that was they for the stanchion bases they had used just regular old everyday hardware store nickel plated fasteners, and they rusted so badly that I had to cut it off with a Dremel tool with a abrasive cutoff wheel, and it was no fun. I broke a bunch of wheels, probably 10 at least, because of the tight spacing, and it was just a lot of work to get it off. You don't want to go through that. So by all means, use the nylock nuts, make sure everything's stainless steel, and develop yourself a hardware kit. If you have fasteners that are going into things that don't have a nut on the backside, then you probably want to use one of the thread lockers that's out there. And I'm going to talk about thread lockers because I'm a huge fan of thread lockers. I've been using blue Loctite for forever, and the blue Loctite, the original thread locker medium blue Loctite, is called 242, and you'll find that older bottles of this stuff don't really say on it what model it is. It's in the part number here, but it's not really front and center. And the reason for that is because they recently, in the last couple of years, I don't know, 2 to 5 years, came out with a product called 243. Now the 243, and this is blue, even though it's in a red container, pay attention to what the label says. 243 is designed for stainless steel. Back when they were doing the 242 thread locker, and they still do the 242 thread locker is still the most common. You almost have to special order this. You won't find it very much in hardware stores. You had a primer that you had to put on the screw threads before you used the 242 thread locker with stainless steel fasteners. The new 243 is designed specifically for stainless steel, and they have some instructions on using it with other types of fasteners, I think like brass and things like that. It's a dissimilar metal thread locker, and it's designed specifically to work with stainless steel. So if you're putting your keel bolts on, like we have here, a swing keel, this is the product to use. It'll hold up and it won't fail. The 242 is suspect. They do make a third variety, and that's called, by the way, these are both 243s. So I brought them both out so you could see that they're labeled differently depending upon where you buy them or when you buy them. They do make a high strength red thread locker, and it says right on there, thread locker red. You do not want to use thread locker red unless you really don't ever want to take the bolt or the fastener off. This stuff is like epoxy. Usually the only way to get it out afterward is to heat it up with a torch and then use an impact driver to pull it out. And so you really don't want to use red Loctite unless you've got something, you know, that you never intend to take apart. It's the opposite of anti-seize. So be aware about the thread lockers. But this 243 thread locker is a great product, and you know, anytime you're using stainless steel, and like I said earlier, you don't have a nut on the other end, use this and it'll be fine. It's very easy to remove, but it won't twist out by hand, and that's the key. It won't rattle or work itself loose. So we have those. I did want to mention real quick, this is dielectric grease, and in a marine environment, anytime that you're putting bulbs into a socket, you really want to put dielectric grease around the base. This is a bayonet LED, and along the bottom here. These bases have a tendency to rust in a marine environment, and the dielectric grease prevents that from happening. It's conductive at a certain level, but it won't really conduct electricity. It's mostly designed to keep these parts from freezing together with time. So use the dielectric grease on anything, any connection point, when you're putting spade connectors in, those types of things, anything that you don't want to have rust. And by all means, use marine grade connectors anytime you're doing wiring. The go-to brand is called Anchor, and they make all the wiring and connectors and shrink tubing, everything that's designed specifically for a marine environment. You really won't go wrong with their products. And so, you know, get yourself a kit like this and make sure that you have it together. By the way, I really recommend cotter rings instead of cotter pins. I want to look in here and see if I have any cotter rings. Here's one. We usually have a bunch. Yeah, and here we have, let's take a look at this real quick for cotter rings. Where applicable, a cotter ring is much preferable to a cotter pin. And the reason for it is that you really need tools to take a cotter pin off. And once you've bent over the ends of a cotter pin, it becomes very difficult to remove. It's also sharp. I cut myself pretty badly last year on the end of a cotter pin that was kind of bent over, caught my shirt and caught my skin underneath, and I immediately pulled that off and replaced it with a cotter ring. So the beauty of a cotter ring is, and the way you use these is you just put the middle part on like so, stick it in there, and then work it around, and presto, you have a safe, removable part. You can do it by hand, and you can do it in a hurry too if you have to, but it won't come out on its own. So you really want to use cotter rings whenever possible. And so this is one of our old clevis pins that we took out of the masthead and replaced because we had new ones. So here's cotter rings for you. These are particularly handy on the smaller size turnbuckles. The really big turnbuckles that you see on the bigger boats, a lot of times these won't fit. They also kind of impede if you're trying to back the turnbuckle off. Eventually you'll get to a place where the ring starts to hit. So this may or may not be applicable to your turnbuckles, but if you can get away with them for turnbuckles, again, it's great. If you need to make an adjustment to your rigging, you can do it kind of relatively quickly without a whole lot of tools and all that sort of good stuff. Okay, so we've talked about thread lockers and dielectric grease. Let's move on to something that is also important, and that's the use of power tools with stainless steel fasteners. One of the things that a lot of people don't understand, these little impact drivers are fantastic for getting stuck fasteners on and off, but people tend to use them as screwdrivers a lot, and what will happen if you're not careful with the threads of stainless steel have a strong tendency to gall, and galling is a situation where one of the threads breaks free and balls up inside the fastener, and it basically locks it up and makes it so it will not turn, and basically seizes the entire thing up. And so you want to be very careful with using stainless steel fasteners. You want to put them together slowly. You also want to use, this is a product, hopefully I have it, yeah, here we go. This is called lube. It's a turnbuckle lubricant, and it's designed, it's very heavy. I think it takes well to a marine environment. It's designed for it. And you put this on your threads and then use a nylock nut and you'll be good to go. This goes a long way towards keeping turnbuckles and fasteners from seizing up. And one of the fastest ways to seize one of these things up is to stick a impact type wrench on there, and the ratcheting motion of it, where it will gall those threads almost immediately, and very easily too. You'd be surprised, like even when it's just moving the nut onto the threads before it's even gotten tight, it can gall. And you know I suppose you just have to experience it once or twice to decide that that's not the right thing to do. I've moved almost entirely to using a regular screw, a regular DeWalt screwdriver. These are both the 20 volt lithium ion batteries, which last forever. These things rock compared to the old 18 volt ginormous batteries. These things last for a month, no problem, without a recharge. I mean, if you're using it all day in construction or something, you're probably going to wear them down, but they have a lot longer life than the originals. And of course, anytime you're using an impact driver, you want to use the impact ready bits. There are a lot of slotted screws in the boat world, and I think one of the reasons that slotted works for deck hardware and stuff is that water can go out of the slots on the end sometimes. But the world is moving to Phillips head, and I've changed all the fasteners in this boat over to Phillips head, every one that I can. You know, these I haven't gotten to yet, but the problem that you run into with the slotted, especially if you're using an impact driver, if you've got and this is particularly true of cleats, if you've got a cleat that's seized in place and you're trying to, and it's got a slotted screw, and you try to use something like this, it's going to literally explode that piece of metal. I've done it maybe 30 times where I've been trying to get a slotted screw out of something, and you know, the only thing left to use after I couldn't do anything else was the impact driver, and these things explode. And if you're not wearing eye protection, you could easily be blinded. So just be aware of that. So I think that the Phillips head screws are preferable, and I've mostly gone to them. Anytime that you've got dissimilar metals, you're going to get electrolysis creating a bond, and this is particularly true with aluminum cleats on boats. That you've got a stainless steel fastener and an aluminum cleat, and you might even be going into an aluminum mast, and the entire thing will seize together after a bunch of years. And on this boat, I pretty much had to drill out the screws. There was no getting them out. They were absolutely 100% seized to the aluminum. The aluminum had bonded, had oxidized around the stainless, and had locked it in place, and there was no getting it out. The electrolysis process effectively creates a battery where current moves from one of the surfaces to another, and dissolves whichever the weaker one is, and that's why they use zinc as as a sacrificial metal, and you'll see zincs bolted to keels and to outdrives of motors and things like this, because the zinc will take the brunt of the damage and protect the rest of the metal as a result. And so when you're using stainless and aluminum together, there's really not much you can do. Aluminum's pretty resistant to marine environment. Stainless is better, but you're not going to get a mast or something made of stainless steel. And I think also that the stainless is not as strong as some of the other metals that are out there. Even galvanized steel, I believe, is probably stronger than stainless. Okay, so we've talked about fasteners for a bit. Let's talk a bit here about well, real fast, hose clamps. So if you've ever tried to tighten hose clamps with a slotted screw, you know that they just slip out, and you're constantly stabbing yourself in the hand and all that sort of stuff. So, but get this, these screwdrivers that are available almost universally in hardware stores, I see them all over the country. If you pull this out, you've got a driver that fits perfectly on the hose clamps. And that's the way to do it. All hoses in a marine environment should be doubled up. There should be 2 hose clamps, and they need to be marine hose clamps. You'll notice this one says stainless on the outside, and it's important that you don't use just regular, auto parts stores hose clamps. They're way too important. Almost everything that you're clamping, almost every type of hose that you're clamping on a boat is absolutely, would be devastating if it were to fail. Your boat would sink, and so start taking on water. So you do not want to mess around with hose clamps. You'll put one on one way and one on the other, so that you have, the screws are coming in on both sides, and that way the flat area is not in the same location of the hose. And so those you want to, when you use regular auto parts store type stuff, it's pretty good, but what I found is that the actual worm and this part of the adjuster actually is the part that fails and gets all rusty, and it gets it starts to skip over the teeth because it's not a well machined product. And I suppose if your radiator hose clamp fails, you just kind of end up stuck on the side of the road. It's not the end of the world. So make sure that you go and spend the money for the right hose clamps. We have a selection of them ranging from smaller than this to really big, and you don't want to take a really big hose clamp and try to tighten it down on something. I mean, in an emergency and that's all you have, then go ahead, but the arc that's in here is specific to the diameter of the hose clamp, and so they change depending upon how big the hose clamp is. So try to stick with the recommended sizing if you can. Finally, let's talk about adhesives, because there's really only a few caulks and adhesives that you want to use. And I'm going to talk first about butyl tape. Well, I'm going to talk about 3 adhesives in particular. We've got butyl tape, which comes in a roll, a very large roll, and it's got paper on both sides of it, and you just kind of peel it off and roll it up into a ball. The second is 3M 4000 UV. This is probably the most common type of marine caulk that there is, and then there's also the 5200 marine adhesive as well. And this is what comes with a lot of the marine cleats and hatches and things like that you're trying to get. And I want to talk about what the differences are between these two. So butyl tape is a fantastic product. You want to buy it from a reputable source, because there are products out there, from China. If you're going to buy it on eBay or something, you really want to make sure you get good butyl tape, and there is bad butyl tape out there and there's good butyl tape, and it's hard to tell the difference. There's no real brand. What the solution for us is we buy our butyl tape from SailRite.com. SailRite sells nothing but top-end stuff. Anything that's in the SailRite catalog is going to be top of the line, definitely vetted as far as the product quality goes, and the price is, it's not outrageous. It's maybe a dollar or two more. Where you really end up, the base price is usually about the same. It's the shipping that they get you on, but whatever. Either way, this is not something you want to mess around with. Get the right stuff. And the way butyl tape works is you just pull off a piece, and you start rolling it into a ball. And if you have a piece of, let's say this is going through a stanchion base, and what you would do is you put the fastener through the stanchion base. So you got a piece of metal up here. I wish I had something to use. I don't know if there's anything in here that's worth using. You know, if you're running this fastener, you know, let's just say for argument's sake that this is the stanchion base, you would take the butyl tape and you'd wrap it around the bottom like so. And you don't want to overuse this. You'll find that it's very easy to use too much. But you know, this is a stanchion base, not just a piece of tab like this. As you cinch this thing down against the deck, it's going to seal that little guy like crazy, and you'll have a great long-term seal. It stays sticky, it doesn't dry, and so as there's flex going on in these attachment points, the butyl tape does a wonderful job of sealing it and keeping it sealed. This boat is 100% dry. It never leaks. There's not a single point, despite all these fasteners coming through the coach roof and throughout the boat. None of them leak, and the reason is because this butyl tape works so well. The next product up is going to be the 3M FastCure 4000 UV, which is a UV resistant caulk. And the difference with this is it dries, and so it depends on the adhesion of this caulk to both sides. It's creating something more like a gasket, and my experience is that this is great for hatches. It's great for port lights. It's really good for things like that. But if there's flexing and moving and that sort of thing, it will eventually fail. And unfortunately, the butyl tape just isn't applicable for everything. So, but nonetheless, this is a really good product, and it's something that is used all the time in the marine world. The third is the Marine 5200, and if you notice, this says adhesive sealant, and this just says adhesive. I guess it says adhesive sealant too, but the idea with the 5200, this is the red Loctite of the 3M adhesive sealant world, and they say use this on things that you don't ever want to have to take apart, because once you put that on there, it glues it on. It's got some movement in it. It's, you know, it maintains a little bit of a gasket softness, but for the most part, it's more of a glue than it is a sealer. And this is more of a sealer than it is a glue. So this is the more popular product. Our kit that we got to redo our port lights from Catalina Direct came with this product. It's a Dow Corning 795, which is kind of a gray adhesive, and it goes in between the glass. And this is really for working with glass products, and it's worked very, very well. It's kind of a lubricant when you're putting gasket material together, and then once it holds up, once it solidifies, it becomes very it glues everything in place. As far as putting the actual port lights into the hull, they had recommended the FastCure 4000 UV, which we used. Very important to tape off around the area that you're going to use, because this stuff just goes everywhere. But once it dries, it's very rubbery like silicone, and it definitely adheres well. So that's pretty much where we're at. And I wanted to hope that helps folks out there. And comment if there's anything that you see that I hadn't thought of.